And now your host, Richard Thomas.
Good evening, and welcome to It's a Miracle. Tonight's show is filled with suspense, mystery, and a surprise or two. And our first story contains all of the above. It places a young mother and her infant child in a dangerous, life-threatening situation, a situation that might have been impossible to escape if it weren't for a miracle. On a Monday in April of 1999, Esther Green and her infant daughter Victoria were visiting at the home of her best friend, Musana Hoskins.
I had called Musana and we hadn't saw each other in about a week. And I said I was going to bring the baby over and we were going to just sit, and talk.
I had a few errands to run, so I asked her if she wanted to come with me. She said, yeah, we'll come with you.
Esther's decision wasn't without some misgivings. That morning, she'd experienced a peculiar feeling that had nearly forced her to abandon her plans.
Something just whispered saying, stay home. And I paused for a moment and I said, well, it's just right up the street.
Ignoring her strange premonition, Esther proceeded to drive Musana on her errands. A few minutes later, they were exiting a parking lot when they had a close call.
This black truck cut us off and then slowly drove by us. And I stopped and I looked at them and I was like, that's strange.
Once again, Esther shrugged off an unsettling feeling, and the two women continued on to their next destination.
She got out and she went inside the store and Victoria and I, we sat at the curb waiting. My daughter was in the back seat drinking her juice. All of a sudden she dropped her cup and started to cry for it. And it was in the furthest possible space to reach.
I turned around and glanced at Esther and I noticed she had gotten in the back seat of the car. And I turned back around and finished what I was doing.
Oh my God. Is that better? It's fine.
And that's when I heard the driver's side door opening.
I'm gonna stay back here with her.
And when I looked up,
What are you doing?
I saw this young white male sitting there and our eyes met. And my heart just dropped into my lap.
Musana had no idea what was happening.
When the car took off, I knew something was strange. I knew something was not right.
She immediately went back into the print shop for help. But inside the Mercedes, the nightmare was just beginning.
I grabbed the steering wheel and pulled it and was blowing the horn at the same time, hoping to draw attention or to get him to stop.
But she only managed to make him angrier.
Lady, if you don't sit back, I'm gonna shoot you.
The threat of violence stopped Esther in her tracks.
I stopped fighting and I sat back and he took off out of the parking lot.
What do you want? I'll give you anything you want. What do you want?
Shut up!
I just had my head down because I was like, how did I get my daughter into this? And looking down at the floor was my diaper bag, and in the side pocket was my cell phone.
Praying that he wouldn't see her, Esther slipped the phone out of the bag and dialed 911.
Please, pull over the car.
At the communication center in Fayetteville, a young 911 operator named Holly Eason had just come on duty.
Fayette County 911.
Please have a baby. Where are you, ma'am? Ma'am.
When I first answered the call, the only thing that I could hear was screaming. So the first thing that I thought it was going to be a husband and wife or domestic situation going on inside of the car.
Ma'am, where are you at?
She was on a cell phone, so we didn't have a location of where she was at.
She won't talk to me. All I can hear is her screaming. She will not talk to me.
When you hear the call going on, you're with her yelling and screaming, saying she had a baby in the car. You're just thinking, okay, I've got to get this down, and I've got to get these officers on the way to help her.
Please, ma'am, where are you at?
Unable to talk to the caller or determine her whereabouts, Holly was helpless until a second call came in.
Order 911, where is your emergency?
Hi, my girlfriend has a Mercedes. I believe it's a 99 or a 2000. She just, I believe she was just abducted and the car was stolen with her in it and the newborn baby in the back seat.
That's when we started putting the pieces together, and we realized that this was going to be linked together. She couldn't talk to me. It was a carjacking.
Once I realized it was a carjacking, I knew there was a possibility that I might not ever see her again. I was just a nervous wreck and just praying and just falling out on the floor, just not knowing what was going to happen to her.
The terrifying conclusion when It's a Miracle continues.
When we return,
You can have the car. You can have the car. I told you, you can have the car, please.
They were not just taking the car, so I figured that they did want us there for some purpose, some sick purpose.
We didn't know if they had weapons on them or anything like that, so her safety and her child's safety were still in the balance.
Oh my God, please help me. Somebody help me.
Shortly after being abducted from a parking lot, Esther Green discovered her cell phone on the floor of the back seat and used it to call 911. The emergency operator, Holly Eason, quickly began piecing information together and relaying it over the police radio.
Please, I have a baby in this car. I have a baby. What are you going to do? There's a child in the car. Stop this car. This Mercedes means nothing to me. This Mercedes means nothing to me. It is a Mercedes.
Please.
Inside the vehicle, Esther could barely control her terror. But she knew that if there was someone on the other end of the line, she had to act quickly.
Okay, please, let's pull over. Pull over here by the Walmart, or here at the Belgian Road.
Esther began shouting out familiar landmarks in an effort to help police pinpoint her location.
You can have the car, please. Stop over here by the Walmart, or even by the movies, the Tinseltown movies.
And then she said Tinseltown movie theater. If she was passing Bells and Bows and then Tinseltown, we knew she was going north on 314. So we had officers start in that direction.
Back at the print shop, Musana waited desperately for any news from the police.
It was one of the worst feelings I think I've ever experienced in my life. I felt completely helpless, and I couldn't quite figure how everything was going to work out okay. I just had to hope and pray that it did.
Oh my God, please help me! Somebody help me! Please stop this car. You can have the car. I don't care. It's going to be Highway 85 coming up. Please.
85 is coming up.
Please.
What about Fulton? Has anybody notified
You
Fulton?
can have the car. Come on, please. Well, where are you going to take us? Where are we going to go? We're headed down 314.
314.
Why are we headed down this way to the airport?
To the airport.
Miraculously, the carjacker never figured out Esther's ploy. But a few long minutes later, there was still no police cars in sight. When the suspect entered a parking lot and slowed down, Esther thought that her ordeal might be over. But unfortunately, her situation was about to become twice as perilous.
Please don't do this. Please don't do this to me. Please let me out. You can have the car. You can have the car, please. Just take the car. What?
Holly realized that the stakes had changed. There were now two suspects in the vehicle.
There's two occupants. So what do y'all want? There's going to be more than one subject.
Holly knew that with two criminals present, Esther was in even greater danger.
Let's go back.
We didn't know if they had weapons on them or anything like that, so her safety and her child's safety were still, in the balance.
Why won't you take the car? Why won't you take
You have to put all of your emotions and feelings aside and deal with what's going on because you're in charge of getting the officers out there to find her and get this vehicle stopped.
Okay, why are we getting back on Highway 85? Highway 138 and Highway 85.
Moments later, Esther spotted an approaching police vehicle.
Oh my God, there's the police behind us. Oh my God.
I heard her say, "There's the police." So we told the officers we knew that they were behind the vehicle.
Copy that, dispatch. I'm in pursuit.
Oh my God, they want you to stop. Why are they asking you to stop? Why are they asking you to stop?
The cell phone was still on and I was still on the line with her.
Why are they asking you to stop?
And that's when they pulled her over. We still didn't know what could happen at that point until they were in handcuffs and being taken away.
Esther jumped from the car with her baby and ran to the officers.
Please put the car in park. Please put the car in park. I have a baby. Oh my God.
I heard the K9 dog barking and I heard one of the officers yell at them to put their hands up and get on the ground.
Get on the ground! I'm talking to you! On the ground! Get on the ground! You know what? Get on the ground, me!
They came and opened up the two doors, asking them to come out, and then I jumped out afterwards and just started screaming. As soon as we got in the car, all that bottled up energy was released. And I held on to my little girl so tight, and I kept on leaning over to her, telling her that the angels are with us, we're okay, the angels are with us. And I just thanked God for just letting us be standing on solid ground and away from that horrible, horrible situation.
When it was over, there was just a sigh of relief going on inside of our radio room, and after we hung up the phone, we just, wow, that was just amazing.
I began to thank the police for finding us, and they were thanking me, and I said, "How come you're thanking me? I'm the one who got carjacked. You rescued me." And they said, "No, if you hadn't done what you did, we would never have been able to find you and your baby."
I believe in miracles, and looking back on this, I know that this one was.
Oh my God, please help me! Somebody help me!
It's a miracle that they were able to pick up on what was going on with her call. It's a miracle that these guys didn't harm her, that they didn't hurt the baby. And I truly believe that God was just looking down on them.
Please just let us out!
They were not letting me out, so I figured that they did want us there for some sick purpose. I just looked over at my daughter. Here she was, 10 months old. She had just taken her first steps the night before, and how bad of a mother was I to allow this to happen to her? And I just knew right then that I had to do something to get out of this situation.
We're headed down 314. 314. Why are we headed down this way to the airport?
She basically saved herself by forming everything that she was saying in a question. She would say, "Why are you passing Tinseltown? Why are you going north on 314? She was doing that so she would not give herself away that she had actually dialed 911. This was a miracle because she's still here, and her child's still here, and all of the officers are still here with their families, because it could have turned tragic.
I know that this situation was guided by the angels because miracles happened every step of the way. Gotta get your telephone?
Yeah.
Hello? You want to speak to Victoria? Hold on. Here, it's for you. I just knew that I had to survive this for her sake.
Hello, Daddy.
So that she'd have a wonderful life in spite of anything that happened that day.
It's been over a year since Esther Green's ordeal, and we wanted to update you on her story. So she joins us now from her home in Jericho, New York. Hello there.
Hi, Richard.
How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Esther, I'm sure everybody wants to find out what happened to those two men who abducted you. Has there been any resolution to the case?
The carjackers this past March were convicted of carjacking and kidnapping. They are now serving a 22-year sentence.
Well, I hope that that helps put your mind at ease. But how's Victoria coping with that terrifying incident?
It affected my daughter for some weeks after the carjacking. She was waking up with nightmares and just wanting me to comfort her. My husband, she would shoo him away, and she would just cling on to me. And she was also afraid of strange men that we would come in contact with while we were out.
How's she doing now?
She's doing fine. She's into everything. Her terrible twos have begun, so she's perfectly normal.
Sounds like she's nearby.
Actually, she's playing right here.
You think she might come on and say hello? Come on, don't be shy.
Say hi to Richard. Say
hi, Victoria.
Say hi.
Well, obviously she's not interested in me, but I want to thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having us, Richard.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
We're all done?
Yes, we're all done, Victoria. Bye-bye. Esther's amazing story came to us from Guideposts magazine, a publication that is always filled with inspirational true stories. We'll be right back.